So, I want to start this episode off by answering a question that I received from somebody who reached out to me for some career advice. And the question was around professionalism. And let me see if I can see. Do I still have it up? Um, I don't know if I still have it up, but it was somebody new to accounting who were asking me for advice on professionalism and how to find the right job. And so the first thing that came to my mind about that question was what happened to people showing up to work as they are. I feel like we're in a space now where people feel like they have to dilute themselves or dilute their dopeness to assimilate into a workplace culture. So I want to explore that and answer that question that I was asked on LinkedIn, but also share some other things that came to mind once I got this question. And as I was thinking about how I was going to respond to this person. And so I first was thinking about this experience where I worked with someone who was a C suite member, and it was most of the people from the department in the room, from staff accountants up to the CFO, and even this might have been some board members or something like that too. But there was something that needed to be done, and a high up person asked one of the accountants to do something. I believe it was an adjusting entry or something we had to make. And the accountant's response to the leadership team was, do me a favor and send me a reminder to get that done. So, first of all, anytime somebody starts a sentence with do me a favor, I usually feel like, okay, it's some BS coming after that. But secondly, why are you asking somebody, C suite or not, why are you asking somebody to remind you to do the job that you were hired to do, that you're being paid to do? So, a simpler response would have been an okay. It could have been, can you repeat that or can we discuss that again? Or it could have been paying attention and taking notes. So, a lot of different ways that that request could have been satisfied without tarnishing someone's brand. So, take care of your business and don't be that person that has to be reminded to do their job. So, the other thing about the question, what I felt from the question, it really wasn't so much as what I call professionalism. It felt like somebody looking for examples of how they can fit into their work environment. And so it really depends on what your definition of professionalism is. Professionalism, by my definition, is about, at the core, respect for yourself and that same respect for others. And when we refer to someone as unprofessional in the workplace, it's because they did something out of the norm of how a person is expected to walk, talk, move, or think in the workplace. Maybe they got loud. Maybe they show up late all the time. Maybe they got into it with a manager or with a coworker. And I even looked in the dictionary. I still have a dictionary on my bookshelf in my office. And so, according to the dictionary, the definition of Let me go back over there. The definition of professionalism is the conduct, aims, or qualities that characterize or mark a profession or a professional person. So basically, when the conduct, and in this case, conduct is the verb and not the noun, but the conduct, or I'm sorry, the noun and not the verb. So when the conduct, the aims, or the qualities that somebody demonstrates, they fall out of the norm of professionalism. Like, oh, this person's unprofessional. Oh, that was so unprofessional. They shouldn't have did that. But what if that person didn't know any better? So they showed up the only way they knew how, which was as themselves. And sometimes that's the struggle because more than any technical knowledge, because technical knowledge can be taught, right? The struggle is how do you enter into a new workplace, whether you're transitioning out of college and this is your first corporate job, or maybe you're just moving to a new company and now the company has a different culture and a different way of operating than what you've seen before. So the two things about professionalism that I just want to just really put some bold print around before I continue first is that professionalism requires you to behave a certain way that might be outside of who you really are. And that can be misconstrued as somebody falling in line or buying into corporate politics, but it doesn't have to be. There's no need to suppress who you are to fit into a box. Secondly, professionalism is simple. It's really about being courteous. So there are there is a role that the environment plays in professionalism, but the bigger function is you. It's a function of who you are because you should be able to be whoever you are regardless of any changes in the environment. So, going back to this career question, this is what I would recommend. I wouldn't necessarily call it being professional. I'll call these best practices for employees in the workplace. Whether you're new, whether you're seasoned, really anybody who's trying to be better at work today than they were yesterday. So, here are my best practices for showing up to work. The first one is move and act with a sense of urgency. If somebody asks you something, respond. Even if you don't have the answer right away, acknowledge receipt of an email or a voicemail and let them know that you're working on it. So, this is one of those soft skills that demonstrates your customer service capability. And the one thing I don't want professionals to miss, especially in accounting and finance, because we're a call center, right? We don't interface with clients, we don't drive revenue, yet we have a major role in the organization. So keep in mind that even though you don't interact with external invoice paying customers, you still have internal customers and internal stakeholders, people that you're responsible for providing deliverables to, people who rely on you for certain analyses and reports every month. So you do still have a customer base that you need to cater to. The second thing when it comes to the best way to show up at work is to participate in meetings and ask questions. This is so overlooked. Too many people sit silently in meetings because they're intimidated by others in the room, or they have something that they want to say, but they feel like what they say isn't worthy of being shared within this group. If you think about a meeting that you sat in in the last week or the last month, why were you there? Was there anything that you contributed, or did you show up to say good morning, good afternoon, good evening? You sat there silent the whole time and then you said thanks everybody and hung up the phone or walked out the room. And I'm speaking from experience because early on, I was that person that sat silently in meetings. Not really sure why. I was taking notes, I was learning a lot, but I still had to let people know that I was there. And letting somebody know that you're there and also that you've been paying attention is as simple as reiterating what somebody else said or rephrase a question that was asked and ask for clarity if you don't understand. Another thing you can do ahead of time is look at the meeting agenda. Look at the meeting agenda if there is one. We can talk about meetings in a whole separate conversation. But if you are fortunate to have an agenda prior to going to a meeting, look at what the talking points are. Go back and do your research on those talking points so that you can have something to contribute to the conversation. Or you have a couple of bullet points where you can form some type of clarifying question. I remember being invited to a meeting to talk about I think it was like Cecil Cecil implementation, and whatever had been going on prior to, I was not even a part of those conversations. But then I get this meeting invite to talk about Cecil and how to implement it and what it's going to look like for accounting and restatements and all of these other things. And so Cecil, or CECL, stands for current expected credit losses, which is a standard issue under GAAP. But because I had a meeting agenda, I was able to say, okay, I'm being pulled into the meetings, even though I wasn't a part of any of the pre meetings. But let me still go into this conversation having educated myself about what's going on, what does Cecil look like in this particular company, in this environment, what kind of things do we need to be thinking about as far as financial statement impacts, all of those type of things, right? So just making a few notes and referencing notes that you jotted down during a meeting will at least let people know that, hey, I'm here, I'm present, and I'm contributing. Especially now with normalizing remote work. If you're that silent person on the phone, people will often forget that you're there. If everybody's remote, people can forget that you're there. If it's one of those hybrid meetings where the meeting is taking place on an where some people are on site in a conference room and everybody else is on the phone, it's so easy to get lost in that sauce. And like I said, when I sat silent in meetings early in my career, it wasn't that I didn't have anything to say. It was because I felt like, I don't know if I should be saying it in here. And that's the thought of many people. Like, what if somebody looked down on what I'm saying or clown my question? Or what if somebody think it's a stupid question? At least you asked. And that becomes a muscle that you will learn how to flex as you grow throughout your career. Is you have to learn to ask the questions that are on people's mind, but for some reason they just won't ask. So maybe we need to have a separate conversation about presence. I've heard executive presence a lot, which it sounds like it's reserved for the C suite, but there's some things to know about presence, your professional presence, regardless of what your pay grade is. And then the last thing I'll say about best practices for showing up to work is to be cognizant of your appearance and the energy that you bring to the environment. Let me first let me take a sip of my water. But let me start with energy. There are those workplaces, those departments, those people who always mad when they come to work. Soon as they get to work, all they can think about is leaving. I don't feel like being here today. I'm late. Don't nobody come at me crazy. Why am I getting this email? Those type of things. If you're just disgruntled about being at work, if you find yourself discussing people all the time instead of discussing new ideas, that's the energy that you bring to the environment. Don't be the person that people look to for gossip, but they won't look to for guidance. It's easy to get caught up in a break room chat or a Teams or a Slack chat where you're talking to one of your colleagues about how annoying your boss is and all these other things. That's not called for it. That's not helping you get your job done. Everything you think or feel doesn't need to be put into the universe for others to potentially use as leverage against you later. When you show up to work, show up to work. Own the energy that you bring to the environment. Being cognizant of your appearance. Get dressed for work. I can put a period there and end the conversation, but get dressed for work. And it's all about first, what makes you comfortable? And second, what impression are you giving? If you show up to the meeting with a hoodie and a hat on once or twice, that's cool. If it's a Friday afternoon or a Monday morning or a Wednesday evening, that's cool. But keep in mind, if your priority is how people perceive you in the workplace and working in these virtual environments, your on-screen video is sometimes the only interaction or the only perception people will have of you. And so if you're wanting to dress for the job that you want, if you want a C-suite job or you want to run the department, there's a way that you have to show up. Again, nothing against hats, hoodies, t-shirts, none of that. Company swag, none of that. Because I've done all of that. And I've seen people at all levels within an organization show up the same way. I've seen founders and CEOs show up in t-shirts. Nothing wrong with that. But this is again one of those essential skills. A lot of times they're called soft, but it's nothing soft about these skills because they're transferable and they can take you far. And honestly, the transferable skills add more value to your brand. So think about how you want to show up, how you want to be perceived, and that's how you determine your appearance. There are things in corporate America that we can't control, but there are things that we can control. Your appearance, your energy, your attitude, your effort are things that you can control. So that's it for this conversation. And if you have any career questions that you'd like me to answer, you can send them to Nikki, Nikki, at nickwinston.cpa.com. Thank you for listening in to this Career Convos conversation today. And I look forward to you joining again. But until then, Check out all of the resources available to you to elevate your career at nickwinstoncpa.com/careers. And I look forward to chatting with y'all again soon.